One of the more curious observations about this war has been globally a union between radical Islamists and radical leftists, both championing the Palestinian cause and voicing their hatred of the Jewish state. It's an alliance that has led to some very strange bedfellows, perhaps none stranger than the Queers for Palestine bloc, a staple at most large protests in the United States, despite Hamas's death sentence for gays in Gaza. But despite the very loud voices from the fringe, the gay community is not a monolith. Many are making very prominent steps to disavow the radical front, and one of the groups helping that is something called A Wider Bridge, which has brought the leaders of 18 gay advocacy groups to Israel to bear witness to the atrocities committed by Hamas and even Gazan civilians on October 7th, and to stand united with Israel. And joining me now in studio with Ethan Felson, executive director, I should say, of A Wider Bridge, as well as Nate Looney, director of community safety and belonging at the Jewish Federations of North America. Thank you both for being with me. I want to start with you, Ethan, because we're talking about the work being done by A Wider Bridge, particularly with the leaders of 18 gay advocacy groups, which is very prominent because, as I mentioned, very loud voices on the Queers for Palestine front, which online at least has become almost a laughingstock, being compared to, direct quote, chickens for KFC.
Yes, and one should not take too much from seeing people who grab headlines, who sit at the fringe and are backed by an army of bots, that they somehow get to speak for the LGBTQ community. The LGBTQ community in America is like all Americans, and almost all stand with Israel. We're just not as loud or disruptive, perhaps, and that's why it's very important for us to be here, for us to show that the LGBTQ community stands with Israel, and for us to bring the stories back, because there is a movement to deny what happened on October 7th. And we see it in the LGBTQ community, and it's unacceptable.
And Nathan, what sort of places is this visit going to focus on? What sort of stories are you going to be bringing back to the United States?
Sure. Well, it's really important for us to bear witness. And in bearing witness, it was important to go down to the Gaza envelope and go to Kfar Aza. It's also really important for us to meet with the LGBTQ leaders in Beersheba and hear from them what their experience was. It's important that we meet with folks that have been impacted, so that way it humanizes the experience, and so that people, when they're talking about what they've experienced, it's really related to the human experience for LGBTQ folks that are here.
I'm going to turn back to you, Ethan. When we're talking about this really bizarre union between these progressive fringes and the radical Islamists, how did this come about, and how did you see it make its way through progressive spaces?
This isn't new. We've seen this for decades. I've been an activist in the LGBTQ community and in the Jewish community for 3 decades. It's been there. We were at a program of an LGBTQ conference in 2016 and shut down because we brought people from Jerusalem Open House who had just suffered a tragedy at a march, and they were chanting from the river to the sea. So it has always been there. It is fueled right now because political discourse is fueled. Social media is fueled. And the fringes have a disruptive strategy. Their theory of change is disruption. And so 500 people show up at a train station or by an airport, and that's headlines. And 500,000 people who are not in that mode, but they support an organization like A Wider Bridge to make sure that we have a close bond with the LGBTQ community, that the LGBTQ community here knows that we stand with them, and that the rest of the world knows that this is how most people feel. Most people see the humanity in Israelis and Palestinians, want people to live in peace and security, and believe that terrorism is always wrong. And what happened on October 7th was an atrocity that must never happen again.
I'm going to turn back to you, Nate, because as Ethan mentioned, there's a bit of a challenge because it's been decades of, maybe you can call it infiltration. How are you going to bring back a message effectively to talk to people that seem to have picked a side?
Sure. And it's a difficult thing to do, but it's really important to talk about the humanity of the individual experience. Meeting with someone who lost members of their family, you cannot deny the suffering that's happened, and it's really important for people to come back to the States and share that lived experience that they've heard with people that may be less sympathetic to change viewpoints as a whole.
And Ethan, are you anticipating hitting heavy resistance from many members of the LGBTQ community when you get back?
We're used to it. We have thick skin and battle scars for many decades. What we're looking to do is to make sure that the people in our very wide networks hear the stories that we've heard, that they understand the optics of what's going on, that we can paint a picture and recognize that the Pride House of Beersheba and the South, the leaders of it told me that they are 1 degree of separation from the atrocities of October 7th. People need to understand how this has upended and ended lives, and that it is the responsibility of people of goodwill to bring those hostages home.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for sharing your stories and for the work that you're trying to do to tell another perspective and to really help balance out these very loud voices that seem to make these statements that don't make a lot of sense. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.